let's kick off then. So really this talk comes about because of my first ever pandemic holiday, which happened a few months back. Spending a bit of time basically trying to work towards the CKD exams, and wanted to spend a bit of time with Kubernetes, working with K8s, but not self-managed Kubernetes. And also wanted to spend a little bit of time just poking around at a few things on Android. So this looked like a way to do it. And eventually, because of some conversations I had where I work, we came up with this ridiculous question, which was running K8s, getting a pod running on a phone. And I thought, well, why not? It's not like I could go to the beach that week. So here we are. Another thing I decided to throw into this was using as close to stock Android as possible. One of the challenges I occasionally face is I've got various apps that I want to have running on a phone, albeit not this phone, but want to have running on a phone, and I don't, or there's complications with having the phone rooted, there's complications with having other operating systems installed. So it's almost stock Android. It's Realme's version of Android, and Real Who is, I guess, a real question. So for those who are interested in the device and what the phone is, this is just an overview of the specs. Another thing I was looking at sort of post-lockdown was connectivity from where I'd be working, and so have been experimenting with 5G service in London. That's really the justification for going with this device. And so the way I've been using it is really as it comes pretty much out the box. It's for the Chinese market, so the only sort of, I guess, customization I've done is put a copy of Android Play Store on there, but it's really running as close to the latest Android as I can get it. No root, no custom recoveries, none of that stuff. If you're familiar with running things like Lineage on Android phones, or ARM phones, I guess. And again, I think I've covered some of this already, but the key point for me was having a play around and sort of furthering investigation and furthering my knowledge around Android development. I've done tiny bits of that in the past. It's not my focus area, so it's just something to have a bit of fun with, really, on a holiday. So starting to look at what can we do with Android, and possibly everyone's familiar with it, possibly no one's familiar with it, possibly there's a mix, right? But Termux is definitely an interesting, I guess, Android application, for want of another word, if you want to do something slightly more useful with an Android phone. Downsides are, though, that we still don't have root. The on-screen keyboard, at least on the phone I've got, is a complete nightmare. And even before it became political, really wasn't looking to enable Bluetooth and use a Bluetooth keyboard. Another application I found along the way was SCR-CPY, which is really just a way of using the Android development kit, or ADB, to get I guess, for want of another phrase, a remote desktop into the phone, so that I can then use really any other network attached device to be the keyboard, to be the screen, and get me away from that on-screen keyboard. Something else I'm familiar with, or at least have some familiarity with, and was looking at using here, was Kind, or Kubernetes in Docker. Again, out of interest, many people been using this, playing around with this? Is this something that's familiar, or is this new to folks? We'll go with fairly new then. So basically, it's a way of getting a K8s, or full Kubernetes deployment onto a machine using Docker as the host. So instead of spinning up virtual machines, you basically spin up Docker containers. It's essentially kind of shrink wrapped, so you can just invoke a command or download it, depending on your distro, maybe build it depending on your distro, but really it's sort of a one-line Kubernetes in a box type of thing. And again, my focus for playing around with this was really sort of doing some extra study towards CKA, CKAD, which are the Kubernetes exams. Downsides on kind, at least for this platform, is that there's no native ARM images. Could have built them, but wasn't really where I wanted to be spending my time. And yeah, again, it's still expecting to have root, and I don't have root on this device. So I started to look around and think about what tooling might be able to make this work without going down the path of getting root on the device. QEMU's probably familiar to at least some, if not all, of this audience. If it's not familiar to you, it's really, if you're familiar with VirtualBox or Parallels, let's ignore the truth and the details. But QEMU and KVM is somehow sort of comparable. Don't have KVM, which is the hardware acceleration on Android. So this could be slow, and the question is how slow, right? Also, has anybody done anything with this before? And so it turns out there's at least a couple of projects. There might be more, but these are the two I sort of encountered along the way. Didn't spend really any time with Limbo. It seems to be a slightly more established project, but it's the one I came to second. And by the time I'd got to where I'd got to with Alpine-Term, I decided not to look at it really. Alpine-Term is fairly small project by somebody who's essentially looking to do a similar thing or facilitate a similar thing I was trying, and basically what their application, and I'm pretty sure it's in the app stores if you wanted to download the sort of the native one, but basically it gives you an Alpine instance. It's sort of a mashup of an Alpine image and Termux. So really, it's a customization based off of Termux, which we called out back here, plus a bit more stuff. And so I spent a bit of time looking into that, and obviously have some familiarity with Alpine Linux, but not using it as a host for Kubernetes. Also had some awareness of things like Alpine using a different libc, which potentially sort of introduces some other quirks depending on what your app is and what it's expecting. So the long and the short of this was, it was interesting to learn a bit more around Alpine than I necessarily had, and sort of scratch a few things here, but decided that probably wasn't the path I wanted to go down. Some of the reasons being the APK, so that's the Android application, is essentially shipping a specific QEMU binaries. I just kind of brushed over that here. If I was using a phone that isn't kind of dedicated to sort of, I guess, experimentation, I'd probably want to go and understand what those binaries were a bit better. But for now, I've just kind of glossed over that. But did start to look at and did in fact switch out the Alpine image for a Debian image, which is a bit more under my control. And so there, this slide's really just calling out a few hints or a few memories along the way, but basically taking the Debian 10 QCOW image that's available or published for primarily, I think, for the use in OpenStack. A few customizations to that, obviously in things like OpenStack or even public clouds like AWS. This image would get sort of SSH keys injected automatically for you and things like that, which we don't have. So just a few little adjustments, changing the default image size so that I can get a few more things installed than the default would allow. And now we can get logged into a guest operating system that at least is under our control or our build. And my hope was that kind would just work at this point, right? And it would spin up on Debian 10, and yeah, sad panda. A fair bit of standing up kind, or it's tempting to stand up kind clusters. The retain flag there is the way that with kind you can make the cluster persist if it doesn't stand up successfully. And digging around again a bit more into why this wasn't starting. But eventually going up, kind wasn't getting success in the timeline I wanted with kind, so decided to go back and step through the Kubernetes to Hardwire by Kelsey Hightower. That's something that, again, possibly some people have kicked the tires on. I think Dennis mentioned this a little bit earlier. But basically, it's the manual way of building a Kubernetes cluster. It's something I've sort of done on GCP before, and it's fairly copy pasteable solution if you're targeting GCP. A few little adjustments needed to get that onto Qemu or onto Debian, and get it installed. But again, still not a functioning K8s cluster. It sort of starts to become obvious at this point that CPU is probably where we're constrained. Load averages were just very high when you consider this is one core on an ARM chip. Not great. So one way to split that out the way I've used is to split out some of the components into different instances. That way I can at least make use of more cores in the phone. But again, because we don't have root on the phone, we don't actually get any sane networking along this approach. What Qemu will let you do is publish one or more ports to the host, and you can then reach those ports via the host. And in fact, that's how we'll connect to it, or we'll attempt to connect to this a little bit later on. But throwing OpenVPN in the mix meant that I could then expose enough. I could expose enough connectivity, or make enough connectivity between the two instances, so that I could, just have just enough networking between the two instances of the Kubernetes master node and the Kubernetes worker worker node. Had some interesting trips with the device I was doing this on was actually a work device, and it's got security agents on it that meant this was more painful than it needed to be as well. But again, find myself at basically a restart loop of Kubernetes components or master node components won't start up and stay running. A bit of experimentation in here, running etcd from RAM, which is an interesting technique, possibly not one you want to try and prod. But even that was not consistent. But after some digging around, basically got to the point of realizing that some leader elections on some of the master node components were what were failing, and it was possible to suppress those. Again, on a sane, useful Kubernetes installation, all of these are probably very bad ideas, if not totally bad ideas. But this is just a lab and a bit of fun, right? And so with probably 1 or 2 hours more than was aimed for or anticipated on this, we end up with a cluster running that's running returning a healthy component statuses for Kubernetes, and running a what we can see on the screen is a container, but basically a container in we can see it down the bottom. So we can see the pod in the bottom of the screen running, and then in the top screen in the worker node we can see the containers itself running. But we want a demo, right? Because, well, it's no fun without a demo. So let's see how we go. So I'm just going to talk through a little bit about what's on screen at the moment. My assumption is that the right-hand side of the screen, where basically what you're seeing is the screen.
Sorry, 1 second. We've got the demo slide up still.
Oh, have you? Yep. Thank you for shouting that one, because it would have been really dull if you hadn't.
I'm sure everyone else was just about to unmute.
I tried to be clever, and I tried to share only one tab, and it's just.
I thought you were being clever, because on the right side of the screen there was a caption under Homer saying, "I hope this guy stays quiet."
Yeah, I still hope he stays quiet, but we'll see how we go, right? So just to raise the last sort of minute from your memory, on the right side of the screen we've got essentially the phone and what apps are running on here. So I've got basically two slightly customized instances of Alpine-Term, one running my Kubernetes worker node, one running my master node. My assumption is that, well, I can barely read that, so my assumption is on a screen it's illegible. Hopefully, though, the terminals on the left-hand side in Tmux are actually at a font size that folks can read. And so what we've got on screen is the phone running, like I say, those two Qemu instances, a couple of other apps that I was just poking around looking at some stuff earlier. And then we are SSH'd into each of those instances in the terminal to the left, just so that folks can read this hopefully a bit better. And so what we've got this time round, I think I've got the master node in the top tab, and just to see, is this live or am I tricking you with a video? I'm not tricking you with a video. So the first thing that's quite obvious is this kubectl command is taking a little bit of time. This is one of the reasons why this is an interesting thought experiment, but probably not something that's actually useful. But we can see we've got healthy responses from the main components of Kubernetes, and obviously the fact that we got that response at all tells us the Kubernetes API is responding as well. If we just have a quick look in the worker node and confirm what's running here. So we've currently got one pod running. Not that it's particularly interesting, but we can see that we've got one container running in that pod. Should have done this one first because it's the slowest of the two, but we should then see essentially Kubernetes reporting back basically the same status, that there is one pod running. It's actually a deployment. So we can see similar thing. You know, this is the first time with a demo, it's actually worked faster than before the demo. It's quite strange. So we've got basically one deployment, and we can deploy more. So at this point, I need to learn to type. And who wants to give me some unanticipatable string of text to create a deployment with? Any short word, anything random at all?
Wumpus, W-U-M-P-U-S.
Sorry, I went too far.
Wumpus, W-U.
I was just going to say, just do LondonIAC. But then you could have guessed it, couldn't you?
Yeah.
W-U-M-P-U-S. I'll do.
There you go, Wumpus. All right. We'll possibly take a moment or two. crazy. That's really the fastest this has run like ever. And then kubectl get pods. Yeah, you see, I cursed it. I spoke far too soon. Container creating. All right.
So you're going to expose the service. We can all hit your container.
Yeah, maybe for the next round we might extend this. I think I need someone with slightly more patience to work through just the lagginess of this, if I'm honest. So. Hopefully by the time we get there, it's actually running. And let us just do one more thing, which is, once again, that. And we're in that container. So this is my slide that can go either way. So I'm going to claim that that's Homer success as opposed to Homer dolt.
Nice one. Nice one.
And in case the title is still too obtuse, so basically we didn't use kind, and although we cannot escape being running on ARM, but we didn't really think about it. Everything was x86, x86-64, running an Intel Debian image. So just a reminder, we talk about cloud. But really, if you can zoom in far enough or your eyesight's good enough, you can see it's just a Pocket London data center, in this case attached to a Raspberry Pi, but the Raspberry Pi is really just providing power. And that's what I've got for you. So any questions? Happy to see if I can answer them.
How long did you spend on all this? Because it doesn't seem like it was something that was simple.
Yeah, so I thought this would be a couple of days, right? And it did turn into most of the week. And for anybody that's worked with Kubernetes, you'll notice, if you ask me too many questions, you'll notice things like, let's come over here, get deployments. You'll notice things like the DNS pods aren't running, and if I try and the reason really the reason your question about can we hit the service and access this is, well, actually networking is not quite working in this in the worker node. Yeah. So yeah,
you pointed out that's because you weren't rooted. I mean, how much more could you do if you were rooted on this device? All of it.
Basically, yes. I mean, I haven't done much with Lineage OS in a while, but I would imagine that even with Lineage or even just a rooted Android stock image, it could probably get this all working natively. It just the really the driver for looking at this at all for me was working with sort of exam prep. And so if I'd gone down that path, although I'd have found it quite interesting to get that going, it wouldn't actually have sort of hit my study goals. So that's why I didn't go that way.
I think it also scares the pants out of me, because if I'm not an Android user myself, but if I were, and for some reason my device had been rooted, it could be part of a global cloud.
Oh yeah, your phone.
I'm hosting a business container on my phone, and I wouldn't even know it.
Well, the joke, I have given this presentation once before, and the joke was, so we're gonna move away from EKS now, right, and just run this in our phones, and that will save some money. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe not this year.
Oh God, I'm sure there's somebody out there seriously thinking about it.
If I was going to do it again to actually look at doing something useful, I would be looking at K8s, which is we spoke about Rancher a bit earlier. So that it's a Rancher, and in fact, I think it's now backed by CNCF, but it's basically a sort of I don't think cut down is the right phrase, but it's a lighter Kubernetes distribution that has an agreed level of feature parity, and that probably is a lot more sensible to do than K8s here. And I suspect if this isn't easy to do out of the box yet, I get the impression it's coming, just because of how many sort of edge computing discussions I hear around K8s and doing Kubernetes on the edge.
It kind of makes me think that a BYOD device for work is no longer a thing I want to do, because they're going to borrow my compute when I'm not looking. Well,
yeah, I mean, I've got a device dedicated for work because of what I know. I don't believe anybody will ever invoke the functionality, but I know there's certain functionality on there that could do things to my phone which I wouldn't necessarily enjoy. So yeah, I completely use just a different device for that purpose now.
Nice. Anyone else like to ask a question? Probably like me, all too flummoxed. That journey.
No, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going on eBay and I'm buying an Android phone, because I'm an iPhone person, but I'm thinking I'm going to go and get an Android and do that myself now.
So if it's something you would seriously play with, I guess the observations I'd give are at least doing it the way I've done it. 6 gig of RAM is really the minimum of what you would want to buy. And I think, certainly a processor that came out. So I've got an increasing farm of Android devices at the moment, and most of those are relatively new. One of them, though, is just it's a fairly low spec thing, that basically the one I use for work, and the CPU on there. I started playing around with it, and I just decided, nah, this isn't going anywhere. So I spent, because I was also looking at 5G, and actually the tip I'd give around central London, or inner London at least, is that Vodafone is a good one to try out if you're interested in that. But I spent, I think it was about £300 on the phone. But that probably, you can probably get something for around 200, even maybe 150, that's got the sort of spec you'd want, as long as you don't want 5G on it at the moment.
Would you be up for sharing the slides?
Yeah, so I think I shared them with you, the intent, and then I ruined it by not presenting everything. So let's just put everything back on screen. So if people want the slides, there's short URLs that, to my knowledge, are not going to infect you with anything, but I haven't looked too closely. I think Dennis has also got the it's all on Google Docs, right? So I think Dennis has got that. And Dennis, I'm happy for you to share that in the meetup group or wherever, really.
I'll double check, because I'm not sure if I have.
It's in our LinkedIn chat, I think.
Oh, okay. Nice one. I'll go back and check and make that available. Nice one. That was really good. I don't know if I go down the same road. I'll just stick to the course that I'm doing on Kubernetes.
It was sort of a thought experiment that got a bit out of hand.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, but yeah, what's next? You know, that doesn't work. Let's go down the other road. You know, and yeah, I can imagine it just kept going and going. Trying to get it work. Yeah, go on.
I did believe it was going to take me about 2 to 3 days because I thought I was going to get it working in kind. And actually, given what I've learned about the leader elections, I basically, like I say, I had a week off. I don't know when it was, July, June, one of the first 5 years of 2020, something like that. Anyway, I had a week off and I sort of spent a few days on it, and it got to Wednesday, and it's like, no, I'm making this work now. I don't care. I'm just getting this done.
I've told people I'm doing it, so I've got to do it now. Yeah.
Oh, I hadn't even been that daft. I'd actually kept quiet about it. I'd said I'd been dropped in it for a talk, and I'd said, all right, I'll let you know when I come back off holiday if I have something for you. And I came back off holiday, and I'm like, yes, but you owe me beer now.
Yeah, lots of beer. Nice one.